G'day, you're live with Lunch Money, your online and social media home for special situations, workouts and capital raising professionals. My name's Nick Samios. I am the fund manager here at Hermes Capital, and I'm your live stream host. The other day I was talking to my colleague Hector West, who is a partner at law firm Hall Wilcox in Perth, and I said, Hector, if I buy you a steak, will you come on my live stream again? Because you had some very interesting things to say last time. And Hector said, I'll tell you what, you throw in a bottle of red and I'll not only get me, but I will introduce you to all of my partners around the country. And what we're going to do with all of these insolvency partners from Sydney, Melbourne, Perth and Brisbane is give you a little bit of what they're seeing, what's crossing their desk, to get a bit of a flavour of what's going on in insolvency and corporate restructuring around Australia. That's what we've got here for you today. So I am going to introduce them. I'll introduce all of them to begin with, so you can see we really do have a panel here. Got Mark Petrucco from Sydney. We've got Hector West from Perth. We've got Scott Butler from Melbourne and from Brisbane. From Brisbane, and David Dickens from Melbourne. So g'day to all of you gentlemen, and thank you very, very much for joining us today to give us insights. It's always good to know, what solicitors are seeing, because you guys are seeing the action sometimes before anyone else sees it, because people are coming to you guys to prepare the actions and build defences and build claims and enforcements and all that sort of stuff. So it will give us a really good window. Before we go around the grounds, so to speak, I wanted to start off with you, Scott, because you're going to tell us a little bit about this new schemes of arrangement. The government is saying that they're going to tweak the schemes of arrangement, helping companies restructure by improving schemes of arrangement, a creditor scheme of arrangement. Well, what is a creditor scheme of arrangement? If you could tell us what it is and what they're going to do, just give us a bit of a snapshot into that, Scott.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Nick. So a creditor scheme it's effectively a court-approved arrangement where the court approves a compromise of the creditor's claims. So they're not very common creditor schemes of arrangement, actually. I mean, there are also shareholder schemes of arrangements, which are used more commonly to affect takeovers generally, but creditor schemes are not that common. In fact, if you think about how many there were in the last 5 years, there was 3 of them nationally in FY18, 1 in FY19, and only 2 in FY20. So we had 5 of these things in the last 3 years throughout the whole of Australia. And the reason there are so few of them is generally the cost. There's only a few big law firms generally who are doing this kind of work, considering there's not many of them around, and the fees for one of these is usually about $500,000 on average.
Okay, so. All right, that's a nice one when it does cross your desk. Let me ask you, they changed they brought in the small business restructuring to tackle the small end. My understanding is that the schemes of arrangement, obviously with a $500,000 fee, presumably that's the flag fall. I mean, what is it about a scheme of arrangement that is particularly useful for a large company, and what does it achieve that VA doesn't achieve that they think needs tweaking?
Yeah, well, usually they're used to at that big end of town to compromise secure creditor debt. So you can't do that in an administration. In an administration, the secure creditors, they maintain their rights. If they don't vote in favour of a deed of company arrangement, for let's say, then they're not bound by it. But what you can do in a scheme is compromise secured debt. And so generally we're talking about, because we're talking about big matters, we're talking probably about syndicated facilities or sometimes secured bonds, and even potentially unsecured bonds. But so I reckon the majority of these schemes are usually where there's already some sort of potential agreement. Usually you line these things up before you actually apply to the court. So you get together with the secured creditor, you come to a compromise with them. The reason why you need, though, a scheme rather than just doing a consensual arrangement with your secured creditor is generally there might be one secured creditor in the syndicate who doesn't agree, or you might have a bunch of secured creditors, and it's because as long as you get the approval of a certain number in terms of value of your secured creditors, you can, and they vote in favour of the scheme, you can bind the other secured creditors who may not be happy with the restructure. So that's why they're usually used.
Right. So I remember years ago, was it News Corp that back in the recession we had to have, I don't want to malign them if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was News Corp back in about 91, and there was 20 lenders in the syndicate, and there was one holdout that and I think that holdout ended up getting 100 cents in the dollar. I can't remember the details actually. I wasn't even really that insolvency literate at the time. But okay, so the idea is so they're going to make it, presumably that they're tweaking these measures, although I think they're asking for industry feedback at this stage.
So they're asking for industry feedback. And the discussion paper came out about a couple of weeks ago. There's really sort of 3 or 4 main things they're looking at. The first is, and probably the most of the discussion papers revolved around this idea of introducing a moratorium. So at the moment, if you think about voluntary administration, as soon as you put an administrator into a company, there's that moratorium that creditors that comes in, so creditors can't continue to take action against the company and try and wind it up while it's going through the voluntary administration process. But you don't have that in schemes. So with a scheme, you have to come up with the scheme proposal. You have to lodge the relevant documents with ASIC. You've got to make a court application. You've got to go hold some meetings of creditors, and then you go back to court. And during that whole time, you don't actually have a moratorium to prevent the unsecured creditors or the people, the creditors who are not happy with the scheme, from continuing to apply to, enforce their debts against the company and try and wind the company up. And so what they're thinking about is, let's bring in a moratorium. And they're looking at, what should that moratorium be, and getting feedback in relation to that kind of moratorium. There's a couple of other things they're also talking about and have asked for some feedback on. The 2 of those things are voting in relation to schemes. So at the moment, when you in these creditor schemes, you divide the creditors into different classes depending upon whether they're secured creditors or unsecured. And then each of those classes have to vote in favour of the scheme, and there has to be a special resolution. So you've got to get 75% in value and 50% in number. And if you don't get, if one of those classes votes against it, the whole scheme fails. So they're thinking about, should we change that voting so it's similar to like liquidation or administration, where you just need 50% in value and 50% in number. The other thing they're thinking about is this idea potentially of cross-class cram down. So some of your listeners would know a bit about maybe the process in the US in Chapter 11, where they have a very similar voting process in relation to classes. But if at least one class votes in favour, even if there's multiple classes which vote against, the court still has the discretion over there to approve a plan under Chapter 11 if it's equitable in the courts, if the court thinks it's the right thing to do. And so that's a possibility. They have that actually in the UK and in Singapore in relation to their schemes already. So, and I think that's a really good idea, this cross-class cram down. And just the last comment on this is, the other thing that they're asking about is whether we should introduce this idea of debtor in possession financing in relation to schemes. So, commonly referred to as DIP financing. And again, DIP financing has been available in Chapter 11 for obviously many, many years. And the idea about DIP financing is that with the court approval in the right circumstances, you can allow new finance to come in, and they can take a super priority. So they can take their security position can be given a priority over all existing secured creditors and, of course, unsecured creditors. And they actually adopted that in Singapore not long ago. So, personally, I think it's a good idea to introduce this idea of DIP financing into schemes.
Well, yeah, I'll tell you. I mean, when they introduce debtor in possession financing in Australia, I will be at the front of the queue. You know what? There is so much we could talk about. We could talk about an hour for that. We could talk about what DIP financing is. We could talk about the features of Chapter 11. And I think that the scheme of arrangement sounds like it's something that is lawyer-led as opposed to accountant-led. But you've covered that now. What we'll do is we'll do our round the ground. So thank you very much, Scott. We'll come back to you last. I think we'll start our round the grounds with Hector West. Before we do that, the reason I want to go to this camera now and just remind everybody that we are live. And if you ask a question live or make a comment, I'll send you this mug. And just a reminder to don't forget to share, like, and subscribe to our live stream so you get notifications and you don't miss out on any of this wonderful content. I can't imagine what the chargeable half hour would be for these 4 wonderful insolvency partners, and you're getting all that for free on this live stream. Okay, Hector West, how are you doing?
Hi Nick, very good, thanks. Thanks for having us. Round the grounds, just to give you an update from personal observations in Western Australia. What we've observed is there's a large number of disputes around shareholders' rights and disputes between different shareholders. There's also a fair number of partnership disputes and also disputes in relation to trust between beneficiaries and trustees. Insolvency, from what I've seen and also the data that we monitor, it's been at an all-time low, whether it's informal appointments or formal appointments. There are a few informal workouts on the go at the moment, but naturally those things are regularly quite private. What we have seen is a significant ramp up by the regulators, whether it's ASIC, the Building Commission, and also the inquiry into the Crown Casino. There's been a fair bit of activity around those sort of things in Western Australia.
Is that right? Okay, so
yes.
so they sort of held off shooting the prisoners and bayoneting the wounded early on in the COVID, but they're now dragging the files out.
Look, whether that's right or wrong, I think commercial life needs to continue. Yeah. And at some stage, we need to step up the regulation to make sure it continues in a proper form, notwithstanding the challenges that we as a commercial society have at the moment.
And you said a lot of litigation. I was talking to someone, a
Yes.
lawyer, a little bit earlier this morning, and he said there's nothing new crossing the desk, but there's plenty of ongoing litigation. So are you finding that as well?
Well, if we break it up, there is new litigation in the commercial litigation space, but in terms of insolvency related litigation and bankruptcy, most of it would be pre-COVID type of disputes. But yeah, as I said, in terms of other disputes, there's a fair bit of new ones coming across the desk at the moment.
And what about by sector? I mean, obviously, everybody thinks Perth, they think mining. You've had solid iron ore prices. Certainly, any mining services connections that we've got in WA seem to be going very well.
Yes.
So is it? But then again, you've had some. I think since the last time we spoke, I think you've had some high-profile collapses in the commercial construction sector. So sort of looking across industries, what do you see?
Well, looking into the crystal ball, I would say the problems we have in Western Australia, whether it's on an immediate level or long term, is supply in terms of trades or skilled trades for that matter, and also equipment for the trades to complete the jobs. What I can see is significant delays, and it's already happening in terms of certain projects, and it's highly likely that the contracting parties will start to enforce, their rights under the contracts, and which will, of course, lead to more disputes that there are at the moment. That's kind of what I'm suspecting going to happen in the 6 to 12 months from now.
Well, I tell you what, can I tell you, that's very interesting you say that, because I would say that, out of, 3 out of the last 5 matters that I've seen the last couple of days have been people looking for funding to buy new equipment because they're winning more work, but they do have legacy issues, so they're not able to get it from traditional funders. They may have, a bit of ATO debt that needs catching up. They've got a few war wounds that are making them a little bit unattractive for the banks. So I think you could be onto something there. So
that's my suspicion, and I mean we've seen it post-Olympics in New South Wales. The construction boom we had there, and then the fallout from that. There were GST legacy issues. There were always the disputes about defects and all of those things. I can see that happening, in the sort of mid to longer term future.
Okay. All right. Well, look, why don't we have a chat with David Dickens next? David is in Melbourne. Still in lockdown now, aren't you?
We certainly are, Nick. And I was just thinking what I was going to say, and I was trying to count what lockdown we're up to. And there's some funny memes going around at the moment. If we get to 7 lockdowns, you stamp your little cardable or get a free coffee or something.
Yeah.
I think for us it felt like we were really getting the wind behind us about 2-3 months ago. Then we went into lockdown again, and then we hadn't really come out, to be honest. I made it into the office twice, got to a restaurant once, and then we've just rolled into another one. So I think the sense at the moment is we're just kind of going to be stuck either in lockdown or basically a lockdown until we get to that certain stages in the Commonwealth's plan. And it's certainly been pretty hard, I think, for the industries that have been affected. It felt like this was going to be temporary, then you'd come out. But I really feel for particularly restaurants that with about 2 hours notice a week or two ago, just had everything cancelled on them. And it must be shocking the amount of produce that is wasted. I was going to be taking a client out to a very nice restaurant, and we had to cancel because someone was unwell. And I called up, and the poor guy, he was almost in tears. I think that really shows what's going on when, even at the nicer places in town that are normally very schlick and professional, they're really sort of opening up and showing what's happening.
And look, certainly when you're in lockdown, it's very hard to stick to your 14 standard drinks a week. I know that much. So what is it? What are you seeing? What's coming across your desk? Are you a little bit like Hector, whether it's litigation dominant? There's not really a lot of insolvency yet, although the numbers do seem to be ticking up.
No, there's not a lot of insolvencies. The numbers are higher year on year, but I mean that's not surprising. And the fact that the numbers are still lower than what they were in, if you look at month on month, going back 2 years to compare it to pre-COVID, it's still lower, and that's quite extraordinary, really. So it's still not picking up or sort of back to normal in that respect. I like the others, I'm seeing a lot of litigation though, so a lot of us are keeping busy with matters that are purely insolvency. I've got shareholder disputes on at the moment, and often you see the COVID factors that I think these disputes have probably always sort of been there but have been suppressed a bit, and then COVID can kind of bring out some of the factors, and that can be geographical as well, where someone's based in one place and someone else in another, and now they can't connect face to face. One person's trying to run a business remotely, and that can really bring out feelings of unfairness, and the dispute then becomes quite serious.
Yeah, I think things can definitely fester when you don't have the opportunity to have regular face-to-face communications, particularly if you're someone of my generation, I reckon. I don't know, maybe it applies to everybody, but, I think, you do need that contact. And the other thing, of course, is the money runs down. So I suppose, when things are going well and there's money in the bank, you can probably put up with a few, with a few things. And do you think that you mentioned that the insolvency numbers are down? Do you think that there's just a backlog? Because even if everything went back to normal tomorrow, under normal, there's corporate restructuring every day, every week. So is there a backlog, or what's holding them back? What do you think?
I think there's a lot of zombie companies there. I think we will never sort of catch up all of that work that has been foregone. And I say that because when some of these companies eventually get wound up, I think the trail will just be too cold for what went on. So another interesting statistic is the very significant increase in the number of new company registrations. Now, a lot of us are wondering, what do you read into that? Does that indicate, at a worst case, phoenixing going on? And we're not going to really find out about that until creditors actually start winding up these dormant companies, get in there and find out that the assets are actually transferred across? Or is that actually just a fantastic bit of data because it shows people starting new enterprises, and there's growth in other sectors of the economy? So that's going to be very interesting, I think, when we actually get into some of these companies at the moment that are insolvent. But the reason for that, I think, is no one's really chasing the debts, and the ATO, that's the most common driver there, is not, as I understand it, pursuing winding ups at the moment. So we're going to have to wait and see.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting observation. I didn't know about that stat with the new company registrations. When we do the replay version of this, we may find a graphic to throw up to show that those stats. I guess it could be people need, doing side hustles, when they're working from home, and side hustles can turn into, blossoming businesses. So that could be a wonderful thing. I have heard that some businesses aren't even bothering going through an insolvency process, and they're just starting again. And, so maybe there's an element of that as well. All right, listen, David, thank you very much for that. What we will do next is we'll travel. We've started in Perth. We've travelled across the Nullarbor to Melbourne, and now we're going to go north to Sydney. Going to talk to Mark Petrucco. How are you going, Mark?
Hello, Nick. Great to see you, and thank you for the opportunity. Been a long-time listener, first-time a presenter this time.
Oh, fantastic.
Put it that way.
Oh, very good, very good. Well, hopefully it won't be the last time.
No, indeed.
What's crossing your desk?
Much in the same sentiment as you've heard from my colleagues. The insolvency work has been legacy work, so it's pre-COVID litigation and workouts. I think the government initiatives, as coupled with the banking waivers and measures implemented over the last 18 months, has certainly assisted the economy. But in circumstances where you would ordinarily have anticipated during a distressed economy, you would see an increase in insolvencies, the figures have plummeted. But to David's point, we have been noticing a significant increase in new incorporations, which, as you've both touched upon, either identifies that there are people who are now showing the entrepreneurship and they've launched their own new businesses, or which may well be part of the explanation. There are a number of companies which have been hibernating, probably zombies, and a new entity has started. So phoenixing activity. That's very prevalent, COVID within discussion within government. Government is apoplectic about stamping up bad director behaviour.
Right.
Throughout these last year and a half, we're still seeing government instrumentalities taking stern action against bad director behaviours, whether it be prosecutions through ASIC, proceedings brought by ASIC to freeze assets, appoint liquidators to companies, take control of entities, or the ATO equally, although they are you would think, in a dormant phase at the moment, they are ready to launch their DPNs where they feel that there are circumstances which do not meet the ATO requirements for waivers or payment arrangements to support a business.
All right. Well, okay. Well, so I guess you're saying that directors, you're not going to get away with anything with bad behaviour at the moment. The other thing is, everyone has an opinion on the ATO. Everyone seems to they know someone, they're talking to someone, and they've got special information. Our friend Ian Hyman told me there's going to be 100 notices issued a week. This is about 4 months ago, and I don't think we haven't seen that. So, I mean, what do you? Are they just lying dormant because now we're in the Delta and we've got troops in the ground in Western Sydney? I mean, are the ATO just going to lay off, or are they, as you're saying, just making lists and taking stock?
My sense is, I know we should be running a tote on when is the launch. When are they going to hit the ballistic button? I suspect that it might be in 2022. Because I think all of government, both at all levels, are vigilant, trying to bring the pandemic under control. And once we see some greater controlling of this pandemic, particularly the Delta virus, as you mentioned, I think you'll probably see that on the other side of Christmas, perhaps in the new year, there'll be an increase in activity by the ATO, so as to bring in collections slowly, but certainly the issue of DPNs is on their horizon. Okay.
All right. Well, look, let's thank you very much for that, Mark. What we'll do is just head a little bit further north now and go back to Brisbane, back to Scott. So g'day again, Scott. Now, listen, I don't know if my producer managed to queue up a little tiny bit of footage. Have you got it? Let's just see. I don't know if you watched the thing.
Cut away, down towards third man. That is a highly accomplished Test match 100 from KL Rahul. Terrific technique.
Now, Scott, you're asking yourself, what the devil does KL Rahul have to do with me?
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you, you are the 100th unique guest on Lunch Money. So there you go.
Oh,
I just wanted to celebrate that moment. Now, Hector's been on before, so you don't count, Hector, because you've already been on. But you're my 100th unique guest. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
I didn't want to break your flow of concentration. What are you seeing crossing your desk?
Oh, you know, the story's much the same as the other gents have talked about. Not a lot of insolvency work, but I mean, the stuff I'm getting, which is insolvency related, is just a bit random. You know, it's certainly not. I don't think it's necessarily COVID related. So, got cattle, live export cattle company out of the Northern Territory. It's got issues which are not COVID related, just disputes between the individuals involved. Acting in relation to the collapse of international finance companies.
Oh, you're acting on that one, are you?
Yeah, in relation to that. So I've got an angle there. But I mean, I think from a Queensland perspective, what I expect to really getting hurt up here is the lockdowns, the border closures with the tourism sector. So we haven't seen too much of it coming yet, but I reckon it's just bottling up. We've got Cairns, which is getting smashed from no international tourists. Gold Coast is getting smashed from the Victorians and the people from New South Wales not being able to get up there. Sunshine Coast is similar, although the Sunshine Coast tends to be that if Queenslanders can get there, they'll go there before they go to the Gold Coast. So it gets a bit of a get some people locally going if we're not locked down. I really do think that the longer the lockdowns go, the longer the border closures go, there will be a really serious impact in those tourism businesses. I think, like David has said, a lot of them have already closed down and they're not being formally wound up because nobody's doing anything about it. The insolvency statistics don't reflect all the businesses which have already closed their doors, and nothing will happen to those in respect of those for years to come.
So you do subscribe to the theory that there are companies that are just closing their doors, and they might turn up in, you know, some unsecured creditor might liquidate them in 2 years' time, or there'll be a, you know, and they'll just appear, but they're just ghosting basically.
Yeah, they're just ghosting. Yeah.
All right. Now listen,
every second cafe is like that in CBD. Yeah.
Now, I wanted to ask you, because you are nominated on this scheme of arrangement thing. I mean, Hall Wilcox is a national firm, obviously, and I know that you're not just an insolvency firm. You've got lots of other strings to your bow. You've got other partners doing all sorts of wonderful things. Do you do much secured creditor work as a firm or yourself?
We do a bit. We don't do as much as some of the other players, but we act for a couple of the. So we act for Westpac, we act for Bendigo Bank. In that sort of sphere. Plus, we do a lot of work for the next level of secured lenders, so the mezzanine and mid-tier type lenders, particularly in the property sector.
Yeah, right. Okay. I mean, I have a theory that I think when the action starts, I don't think there's going to be as much bank action as people are expecting, because over the last little while, there's a proliferation of private lenders, you know, with all the low interest rates and all the rest of it. It's poured a lot of capital into that non-bank sector. And I just wonder if that's where the action is. So if you're dealing with those people, you're in the right space by the sounds.
Oh, definitely. It definitely will be, Nick, because, you know, the people that the banks are so hesitant in terms of enforcement, they've got so much bad publicity that probably the only parties that actually will take some enforcement step when things, you know, are in default of those kind of lenders. So I agree.
All right. Well, look, what we're going to do is, thank you very much for that, Scott. We'll just come back as a panel. Thank you very much, Jill. Jill's asked a question, and I'll let one of you gentlemen sort of volunteer to answer it. For our listeners, if the general view is that ASIC has focused on actions against directors, that insolvency work has not recovered, what are thoughts on the estimated increase in the ASIC levy on registered liquidators? So she's saying, there's more corporate malfeasance, but the insolvency guys aren't seeing work. You know, what do you think about the increased levy on registered liquidators? Who wants to field that one?
Who's going to go first?
I'm happy if you want to. I don't think they're directly related, because
Yeah.
The ASIC levy is really in relation to the amount of enforcement activity and regulation that ASIC needs to do in respect of liquidators themselves. So there shouldn't really be necessarily direct correlation between ASIC actually taking action against directors and increasing the levy. So.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Jill Lawrence, for your question. Much appreciated. Now, who was talking a bit earlier about concern for supply chain? I think that might have been that was you, Hector. So did you? So
in terms of in construction space, I think that's
right. Just talk us through your concern there.
Look, what the evidence is that we have in Western Australia is that for construction projects, we have a shortage of equipment and also a shortage of skilled staff, probably because a variety of reasons, supply from overseas as a start, but also skills probably because of our hard border. And I think that would cause problems down the line in terms of performance of contracts, especially with certain timeframes that have been agreed to. Naturally, most of these things would be outside the contracting party's control. So I do see a bit of a problem there in terms of delays and claims that would follow from that.
Okay. Well, that's interesting that Hector says that, and he's from West Australia, which may as well be on another planet at the moment. You've got nothing like what the rest of us are going through. What about someone from the East Coast? I mean, we've had, in Sydney, we haven't even been able to get tradies on site in some instances. They're letting the tradies loose just a little bit in a restricted basis. But I wonder whether or not that's got the same sort of issues. Does anyone want to pick up that line of thinking?
I think it was actually me, Nick, that raised that before we started talking. And there's a couple of examples which I've been involved in. One is you think about trying to get a new car at the moment is impossible. Freight costs getting stuck into Australia is increased, I think, about tenfold from what it used to be in terms of how much you pay to get a container into the country. I love riding my bicycles, and my bike mechanic tells me that he can't get bike frames, he can't get bike parts. He foresees, in 2 or 3 months' time, where they won't actually be able to sell any new bikes or build them up because they won't have the parts. You can't get timber on building sites. I just think this whole supply chain issue is a big issue. I think it's going to start to bite soon, where you simply cannot, as a business, get the product that you normally want to supply into the country or at a reasonable cost. So I think that's something we need to watch.
So you're seeing that as people not having goodies on the shelves, whatever those shelves might be, whereas Hector's sort of seeing it as a bit of a threat to ability to perform, I think, if I'm hearing you correctly.
A bit of both, isn't it? Yeah.
But a bit of both. Yep. Okay. Our friend Frank Lapalato has thrown in a question. Let's see what Frank says. Should we? Oh, okay. Frank is an insolvency practitioner, so he's jumped on this ASIC one. Thank you very much, Frank. Hope you're doing well down there in lockdown Canberra. Should we provide funding through ASIC up to 5,000 to 10,000 to liquidate these zombie companies for liquidators? So zombie companies are an issue. Everybody knows about them. If these things are ghosting, I think that's a term that I've started using. Who's going to want to wind them up? What do you think, David? What do you think?
It's a question of whether it's in the public interest, isn't it, to be spending some money there? There's obviously some pretty decent policy arguments that someone's got to deal with these companies. So some sort of scheme to support that, I think, would be a good idea, because if there has been bad behaviour, or if there are unreasonable director or related transactions or the like, it'd be better to get in there now and get things right before the trail gets too cold. But unfortunately, the difficulty we've got is the insolvency is somewhat unique. I mean, if you think about it, imagine if the system was, if someone robs your house, you've got to pay for the police to turn up and you've got to pay them to investigate. That's kind of what we have with this system. So at some point there is a need, I think, to have a bit more of a think about how you actually fund liquidations, particularly where there's wrongful conduct. And I'm not sure the answer is trying to put that cost back onto liquidators. It's all a bit circular.
Oh, there you go, Frank. Thank you very much once again.
Can I just add to that, if I may, Nick? Sorry.
Yep.
And I think the approach is commendable, that that we should be doing something to actually bring these zombie or ghosting companies to a finality, so that practitioners can then do what they do best and investigate so as to act in the best interests of creditors. But if we turn the prism just slightly and think about how could we do that, some of us on this webinar might recall that there was a time when proprietary limited companies would have to submit an annual return with ASIC. I'm not suggesting that we go back to that day, but maybe some form of declaration of solvency or financial support. And if that sort of declaration document is not lodged with ASIC, it might then trigger an alert that is amiss, which might lead to some form of, not a deregistration, but a warning that accounts haven't been, that declaration of solvency has not been submitted, which then might lead to a deregistration process, similar along those lines, so that becomes an automatic process rather than a cost outlay to the community.
What about BAS statements and that sort of thing?
Well, the way in which the government's been moving of late to so that all departments speak to each other, that would also lead into the ability to measure across, lodgements for BAS and GST returns and the like. So it would be traceable. And if you're meeting those requirements, then it could then lead to ASIC taking an automated process that your business will be deregistered or placed into a form of external administration.
Okay, now look, we've got another slightly technical question here. So Michael Murray proposes merging insolvency under the umbrella of AFSA, i.e. removing it from ASIC and utilising a government liquidator for these types of companies. What are the panel's thoughts on this? And congrats to On the Century, Scotty. Thank you very much to Matthew Hudson. Who wants to take that one? Probably your turn there, Scott, since you got a mention.
Okay. Utilising a government liquidator for these types of companies. I don't think it's such. Well, first of all, in terms of actually merging things into AFSA do a great job. I think probably, I don't want to have too much of a crack at ASIC. I know some good people there, but I think in terms of the way that they regulate the bankruptcies and personal insolvency, they do a very good job. They're probably, I think you speak to most bankruptcy trustees, they probably think that they do a bit of a better job in relation to that than on the corporate side. So I've actually been a long-term proponent, I think, of having a single insolvency regulator too. I can't really understand why we have two insolvency regulators. I can't think of another country that does that. So it sounds like it makes sense to have a single regulator. Utilising a government liquidator, again, why not? It's a good idea. We do it for bankruptcy. Why wouldn't we do it in relation to zombie type companies in the corporate sphere? They would be dealt with, and there would be obviously public funding for it. So I think it's actually a pretty good idea.
I guess. Thank you. Thank you very much to Matthew Hudson for that question. Much appreciated. Good to see that we're getting insolvency people in Brisbane tuning in. I guess it's got pluses and minuses. I guess because some of these insolvencies are actually they cost money, don't they? And the insolvency people are forced to do them. So if someone else is doing them for free, I guess it's a cost burn that they don't have to bear. We're nudging up against the 40-minute mark, which means that we're running out of time. So firstly, to our viewers, Matthew, you've earned yourself one of these G and Blue inside lunch money mugs. As has Frank, if we haven't seen you, Frank. Jill, we can send you another one, but we are getting this wonderful range of lunch money caps. So I might send you one of those, Jill. But I'm going to do one more quick around the ground. So this is your last chance to get a question in as we do that. So look, we'll go in the same order that we started. So just a chance to put in some final thoughts. Hector?
Not much final thoughts from Western Australia, other than we are thinking about our friends over east, and now in Canberra, where Frank is based. It was just good to see everyone for a change. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, thank you very much, Hector, for organising this. And yes, there will be a steak and a bottle of red as soon as we're allowed to come across the border. I think we then went to Melbourne next. David, closing thoughts?
Thanks a lot for having us, Nick. I think the real question here is ATO activity, so we'll watch that with great interest.
Okay, I should really see. I should write to the ATO and see if I can get someone there to come on lunch with me. That'd be hilarious, wouldn't it? Mark, Petrucco, what any closing thoughts from yourself?
Thanks for the opportunity. Again, sentiments to one and all to be safe, but certainly reach out, because I do see that there'll be a heightened commercial dispute wavelength coming through. So we are here to help.
Okay, very good. And finally, in Brisbane.
Yeah, thanks again. I think that the wave, if it's going to come, it will be mid next year and going forward. So we've got a while to wait.
Mid next year. Wow. So you think that before we see any serious uptick in restructuring work, we're talking about mid next year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I just very quickly, does anyone want to, does everybody concur? Mark, do you concur mid next year?
I'm thinking maybe, depending on when the election's called, a federal election, a lot of the federal government utilities will go into a hibernation, the ATO, I mean, in this example. So if once the election's announced, they will put pens down for the 6 weeks leading in case there's a change of government, which leads to a change in policy, then they pick up their pens. But I'm thinking as well, it's around Easter, middle of next year.
Wow. Okay. What do you think, Hector? Quickly, what's your... So we got Easter, we got middle...
Oh, look, I don't want to really put a time on it, but what I would say is I think once we've hit the vaccination targets that the federal government's been promoting, there'll be a gradual increase in recovery. And at some stage, whatever that time frame will be, there'll be a spike in insolvencies.
Okay. I've just got it. And what about yourself, David? What's your...
After the election.
After the election. Right now, Rajiv Goyal from Wexted Advisors in Sydney says, think we will see fallout Q4 this year. So Rajiv's bringing it forward. Thanks a lot, Rajiv. Appreciate you making a comment.
I'm sure he means Q4 in financial year.
Oh, Q4 financial year. Okay. All right. Yeah, I guess. All right. So you're gonna claim that one, Scott. Okay, fair enough. All right. Look, thank you very much. Thank you very much to Scott Butler, Mark Petrucco, Hector West, and David Dickens from Hall Wilcox. It's been wonderful to have you on. Really appreciate you. Really appreciate you coming together and giving us that national perspective. Thank you to everybody who's watched us live and thrown your questions in. Really appreciate that as well. And thanks to all of our listeners on podcasts, Apple, Google, Spotify, etc., etc. Look forward to speaking with everybody, seeing you all again next week. Thanks a lot, guys. Cheers.